I never expected to become a best-selling author. Especially not because my wife wrote the source material, her affair journal. You don't expect betrayal to show up in cursive. Neatly spaced lines, deliberate margins, clean pages soaked in ink and secrets. But that's exactly how I found out. Not through a screaming match or a caught-in-the-act moment, but by flipping through the leather-bound diary my wife thought was cleverly hidden behind a stack of outdated textbooks in the guest room. Rachel always had a thing for aesthetics, handwritten lists, Pinterest-worthy meal plans she never followed, faux organic candles, and perfectly arranged throw pillows. I used to love that about her. Now it just felt staged. We'd been married for 12 years. That's a long time to learn someone's rhythms, but somewhere along the line, hers started changing. At first, I chalked it up to her new job, marketing for a fast-growing tech company, late hours, high stress, big campaign on the line, and all that. But the changes went beyond fatigue. She started avoiding eye contact. Her laughter became thinner, like it was performing rather than felt. Her phone stayed face down all the time, something she never used to do. Long showers. Short temper. And most notably, the absence of intimacy. It was like living with a beautifully detached roommate who occasionally smiled at me out of obligation. I kept telling myself it was just a phase. 12 years together, 2 failed rounds of IVF, more hospital visits than vacations, maybe we were just worn down. But something about the way she moved through the house started feeling off. She wasn't sad or tired, she was elsewhere. And I could feel it in the silence between us. That afternoon, I wasn't even looking for anything. I was rearranging the guest room, mostly to distract myself from the ache that had taken root in my chest. I'd been pushing away the gnawing suspicion for weeks, and cleaning felt like something I could control. I shifted a pile of books off the top shelf, old college texts we hadn't touched in years, and that's when I saw it. Black leather. Small lock. Her handwriting on the inside cover, when I flipped it open, private, do not read. That's the funny part. She didn't even try to hide it properly, just stuck it behind a few dusty paperbacks like I was supposed to respect the boundary. Like a man sensing his world is crumbling wouldn't dare scratch the surface of a lie. I hesitated. For a moment, I stood there, journal in hand, heart thudding like I was defusing a bomb. I knew if I opened it, nothing would be the same. But I also knew if I didn't, I'd keep living in the shadows of maybes. I picked the lock. It was easier than expected. She used a cheap clasp, probably assuming the illusion of privacy was enough. She didn't count on me needing the truth more than my own peace. The first page hit like a gut punch. Dates. Names. Feelings. Everything written in immaculate detail, like she was documenting a novel in progress. The name Brandon appeared early, attached to a flirtatious coffee chat that felt different than the usual banter. As the pages turned, the entries deepened, lunches turned to hotel rooms, guilt gave way to excitement. Each confession bled into the next, written without shame or hesitation. She wrote about lying to me with almost academic detachment. Not just the logistics, but the emotional choreography behind each deception. The fake meetings. The excuses. The crafted expressions she used to convince me she still cared. One entry stood out: I've become better at pretending I'm still in love. He's so trusting, so slow to catch on. I almost feel bad, almost. I felt my chest tighten. I kept reading. She described Brandon like some mythical creature, passionate, wild, thrilling. She praised the secrecy, how the stolen moments made her feel young again, how she had no plans to stop anytime soon. There were receipts tucked in between the pages, printed confirmations from boutique hotels I'd never heard of, spa visits she claimed were girls' nights, and even a train ticket from a weekend I remembered she spent working remotely. She hadn't just lied, she'd orchestrated a second life. A curated, candlelit, rose-petaled betrayal. She wasn't remorseful. She was methodical. proud, even. Like every paragraph was a trophy for outsmarting the man who'd loved her through infertility, late bills, broken dreams, and everything in between. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, journal in hand, the light from the guest room window starting to fade, my fingers numb. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was cold. Empty. Like my body had moved into autopilot and left my mind behind. I just kept reading, chasing pain like a moth to the flame, needing to know how far it had gone. I lost track of time. At some point, the numbness gave way to something sharper, clarity. And in that cold clarity, an idea began to form. A twisted kind of inspiration. Maybe it was the English teacher in me. Maybe it was the years I spent writing stories no one read. Maybe it was just the only way I knew to survive the humiliation. But I realized something as I read the final page. She thought she was writing a secret. What she'd really done, was hand me the beginning of a book. And this time, I wasn't the clueless husband in the background. I was the author. Grief doesn't always arrive in sobs and broken plates. Sometimes it settles in with a quiet smile and a plate of overcooked spaghetti. The night after I read the journal, I made dinner. Set the table. Lit the little tea light candles Rachel liked, the ones shaped like succulents. I plated everything carefully, like nothing had changed, because on the surface, nothing had. Except everything had. She came home late again, of course. Kicked off her heels, gave me a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes, and complimented the smell of garlic. Her tone was distant, her movements sharp and practiced, like someone playing a character they'd grown bored of. I asked her how work was. She said exhausting. I asked if she wanted wine. She declined. I asked if she was okay. She said of course. And that's when it clicked. Rachel wasn't hiding anymore, not really. She had already moved on emotionally. I was just the place she returned to sleep. Her investment in us had evaporated while I'd been busy trying to water the dead roots. I started playing along. I kissed her cheek in the mornings, made small talk over coffee, even suggested date nights she'd always managed to reschedule. Each interaction was a test, and each one confirmed the same thing, she wasn't here anymore. Not in any real sense. And the more affection I offered, the more uncomfortable she became. She recoiled from my touch like it left a mark. It almost became darkly comedic, watching her flinch as I leaned in, watching her pretend to care for exactly 3 seconds before she retreated into her phone. Her phone never left her side now. Always face down, always silenced, always charged. A small digital fortress where she kept whatever parts of herself I wasn't allowed to see anymore. I didn't ask about Brandon. I didn't ask about the journal. I didn't even let myself act suspicious. I smiled. I did the dishes. I folded her laundry. I watched the performance unfold, calmly aware that I was the only one still in the audience. But behind the scenes, I was busy. The day after I found the journal, I made copies, digital and physical. I scanned each page meticulously, preserving her prose like a museum archivist cataloging disaster. I backed it all up to an encrypted drive, then to the cloud, then to a USB stick I taped beneath the bottom drawer of my desk. She had no idea she'd written her own downfall in 200-page increments. One line from her journal lodged itself in my brain and refused to let go. I feel more alive lying to Eli than I ever did telling him the truth. That one hit different. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so precisely honest. Rachel wasn't just cheating. She was thriving in the lie. She didn't miss the marriage. She missed the high of pretending it still mattered. For a few weeks, I lived in that silence. Functioning. Teaching classes. Grading papers. Coming home to a woman who had already packed up emotionally, even if the suitcase hadn't yet hit the floor. Then came the shift. One night over dinner, again, candlelit, again, mostly silent, she casually mentioned a promotion. Something about a new division, a new office, possibly in Portland. She smiled when she said it, almost dreamily. She even tossed in a suggestion that maybe I should think about moving too, like she was offering me a seat on a train she had no intention of letting me board. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning her exit. And worse, she wanted to make it clean. Controlled. She wasn't going to have the decency to break my heart with a confrontation. No, she wanted to slip out the back door with the lights still on, maybe leave a note on the counter that said something poetic. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, her journal open beside me, and for the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't pain. I felt purpose. They say write what you know. I'd spent years trying to create fiction from scratch, plot lines, characters, motives. But now, I didn't have to imagine anything. I had the skeleton of a story sitting right there in front of me. All I had to do was flesh it out. So I started writing. At first, it was just therapeutic. A man betrayed by the woman he trusted most. But the more I typed, the more I saw the story forming into something else, something darker, sharper. The main character wasn't just betrayed. He was manipulated, gaslit, emotionally pickpocketed for years. The wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was strategic, performative, almost sociopathic in her duplicity. I changed names, of course. Changed locations. Blended in elements from other couples we knew, added fictional twists, exaggerated some events. I framed it as psychological fiction. A mystery, even. The kind of slow-burn domestic drama that readers devour on airplanes and book clubs pretend is literature. It became a compulsion. I wrote late into the night, every night. Scenes poured out of me like they'd been waiting for years. I gave the wife a secret drawer where she hid her souvenirs. I gave the husband insomnia and a talent for watching people without being seen. I gave the affair partner a smug grin and a self-help podcast. Rachel would drift to sleep upstairs while I sat in the study, hammering away at the keyboard, writing her into a corner she didn't know existed. By the end of the second week, I had 30,000 words. By the end of the month, 60,000. It wasn't a book yet, but it was becoming something dangerous. Something undeniable. Every time she laughed at a text or offered me a hollow excuse for being late, I smiled back, because I already knew how her story ended. She just didn't know she wasn't the author anymore. In public, we were still a married couple. At home, we were two strangers orbiting a shared kitchen. But in my manuscript, she was fiction. And I was finally in control. The day I uploaded the manuscript, my hands shook. Not from fear, but from something more volatile, anticipation. The kind that makes your skin buzz and your chest feel too small. I had spent months polishing the story, sanding down the edges, sharpening the tone, disguising the familiar under just enough fiction to make it legal. The names were different. The details were tweaked. But the bones? The bones were hers. I chose a pen name that felt distant but literary. No author photo. No bio. Just the title, The Mistress Ledger, and a haunting cover of a woman standing in a hotel hallway, her back to the viewer, a keycard in hand. It started small. A few downloads. A couple of reviews. One local book blogger described it as terrifying in how real it feels, and another said it read like a confession someone accidentally published. That's when things picked up. The online bookstore algorithm started pushing it, and by the end of the first month, it cracked the top 100 in psychological fiction. Then the right person found it. A bookstagrammer with 500,000 followers posted a photo of it next to a glass of red wine, raving about the twisted elegance and uncomfortably relatable plot. Within hours, downloads doubled. Within a week, I had an email from an indie publisher in New York, asking if the rights were still available. They thought the story was a work of genius. Raw, disturbing, emotionally brutal. I told them yes, of course the rights were available. They made an offer, nothing extravagant, but enough to pay off our credit cards and still leave some breathing room. And through it all, Rachel never suspected a thing. The irony of it was poetic. She barely acknowledged my late nights anymore. Never asked what I was working on. If she glanced at the screen at all, she assumed I was grading essays or tinkering with some dusty old short story like usual. The emotional distance between us had grown so wide, she didn't even see the storm forming. One night, she scrolled through her phone across from me on the couch, legs tucked under her, a glass of wine in her hand. She laughed, the kind of laugh that used to be real but now only sounded like an impression of herself. She read aloud something she saw online, a quote from the Mistress Ledger going viral. Said it sounded like something I'd write. Same tone. Same rhythm. Even joked that maybe I should sue for plagiarism. I just smiled and kept stirring my tea. I told her that was funny. She kept scrolling. The book exploded. Within a month of the publisher's release, it was everywhere. Morning shows were reviewing it. A podcast called it a chilling portrait of modern infidelity. Some people theorized it was inspired by a real relationship, but most readers assumed the author was a woman writing from personal experience. A few people online tried to guess who Empty Lawson was, but the pseudonym held up. Meanwhile, my wife, the real-life muse of literary infamy, remained blissfully unaware. Until she didn't. It happened on a Tuesday evening, sometime in March. Rain tapped against the windows, and I was upstairs answering interview questions over email, riding the high of my accidental fame. That's when I heard it, the sudden thud of footsteps downstairs. Then silence. Then the sound of a wineglass shattering on the floor. I knew before I saw her. Rachel had read it. Not just the story, but the lines. Her lines. The phrases lifted almost word for word from her journal. The exact cadence, the specific metaphors, the self-satisfied venom she used to describe her secret life. She'd once described Brandon's cologne as confidence in a bottle. I left that in the book. She had written, he kisses like he owns me. That, too, made the cut. I heard the footsteps coming up the stairs before I heard the breathing, quick, erratic, panicked. She flung open the study door like she was chasing a fire she hadn't meant to start. The look on her face wasn't just shock, it was fear. Pure, uncut, real fear. And for a woman who had spent a year faking every emotion in our home, that fear was more honest than anything she'd offered me in months. She held the book in her hand like it had just bitten her. She shook as she flipped through the pages, quoting the lines back to me, her lines. Accusation in her eyes, disbelief on her tongue. Her voice cracked, not from sadness, but from indignation. How could I do this? How dare I? It was private. It was hers. I didn't answer. Not out loud. I let her storm. I let her pace. I watched from my chair, calm as a priest in confession. She threw down the book and demanded to know how long I'd known. How long I'd been writing. If I had planned this. If I was trying to destroy her. I still didn't speak. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because everything had already been said, in print. She just hadn't realized she was the protagonist until too late. She looked around the room like she expected to find a hidden camera. Like this had all been a setup. And maybe it had. Not in the beginning, but eventually. Once she handed me the blueprint, I'd simply done what any good writer does, told the story that demanded to be told. When she finally left the room, she slammed the door so hard a picture frame fell off the shelf. I waited for the sound of more yelling, maybe a phone call to her lawyer or her sister or Brandon. But there was only silence. Heavy, bitter silence. Downstairs, I could still see the wineglass shattered across the kitchen tiles. The red stain soaking into the grout like blood in a crime scene. That night, I slept better than I had in years. I wasn't just a man with a broken marriage anymore. I was a man with a hit novel and the truth on his side. It didn't take long for Rachel to go from betrayed to vengeful. The shock of discovery faded quickly, replaced by righteous indignation and the kind of fury that only comes from realizing the narrative has slipped from your hands. She had spent so long curating her image, ambitious, articulate, perfectly poised, and now she was being whispered about in elevators and stared at in checkout lines. Even when people didn't say it aloud, she saw it in their eyes. Recognition. Judgment. That familiar glint of gossip catching fire. It started on social media, speculation that the story in the Mistress Ledger wasn't entirely fiction. A few readers put pieces together. A book blogger from our town mentioned recognizing the landmarks used in the novel. Someone else commented that the protagonist's wife had the exact same job as Rachel. People started comparing photos. An anonymous forum thread popped up titled "Real Life Ledger Wife Found." It was only a matter of time. That's when she made her move. The lawsuit came fast. A carefully worded cease and desist followed by a legal claim for defamation, emotional distress, and misappropriation of personal material. The documents were served on a Wednesday morning, handed to me in a crisp envelope by a courier who barely looked me in the eye. Rachel claimed I had violated her privacy by publishing details lifted directly from her journal. She asserted that the book, despite being labeled fiction, was an obvious, malicious portrayal of her and that I had weaponized her private thoughts against her for personal gain. But what she didn't know, what she had completely forgotten, was that she had already handed me the defense I needed, years ago, when things between us were still soft and warm and filled with half-meant dreams. It had happened on a rainy Saturday, 5 or 6 years back. I was workshopping short stories for a creative writing class I took at the community center. I joked about writing one, inspired by my brilliant, dramatic wife, and she'd laughed, called herself my muse. She grabbed a napkin, scribbled, "I hereby give Eli full permission to use my life as material," and signed it with a flourish. We both laughed. I tucked it into my notebook. Later, I scanned it. For fun. For posterity. That napkin ended up in a file of miscellaneous writing-related stuff, forgotten until I pulled it back out during the early stages of drafting the Mistress Ledger. I'd smiled at it then. Now, it was a bulletproof vest. When my lawyer submitted it to the court, along with timestamps proving that the journal had been accessed on a shared household device with no passwords, the case crumbled. Rachel's legal team tried to pivot. They claimed emotional exploitation. They said I'd breached an unspoken bond. But the judge was unsympathetic. The book was fiction. The characters had different names, jobs, settings. And the source material, while deeply personal, had been written on a shared laptop, in a shared home, by someone who had once given me written permission to use her life as inspiration. The dismissal was swift. Rachel didn't just lose the case, she lost the illusion of control. The moment the court filings became public record, it was open season online. Screenshots of her attempt to sue over a book everyone now believed had to be about her only confirmed the speculation. Her co-workers whispered behind her back. Friends stopped replying to her texts. A family friend removed her from their group chat. She was no longer just possibly the inspiration, she was the confirmed one. The woman who cheated on her husband, mocked him in her journal, and then watched in horror as he turned her betrayal into literature. And just like that, she became the villain in everyone's story, not just mine. Brandon didn't stick around long after that. His name wasn't in the book, but people found him anyway. A little LinkedIn digging, a few matching Instagram posts, and the connection was made. His office became a war zone of rumors and HR meetings. His girlfriend, yes, he had one before Rachel, found out, dumped him, and aired it all online. He blocked Rachel. Deleted their photos. Removed every trace of her from his feed. Their grand fantasy, midlife passion and starting over, imploded under the weight of public scrutiny. Rachel went dark on social media for a while. Then came back. Then disappeared again. She tried posting about healing and growth once or twice, but the comments were merciless. People quoted lines from the book beneath her posts. Screenshots of passages that matched the tone of her online captions too closely. Readers tagged her in fan art of scenes from the novel. One artist rendered a stylized image of the fictional wife sitting in a hotel bed, typing furiously into her phone while the oblivious husband made dinner downstairs. The caption read, "Inspired by a true story." It went viral. Rachel was tagged hundreds of times. She deleted her account within a day. The emotional fallout was everything I had imagined, only colder. More complete. She hadn't just lost her lover or her pride, she lost her mask. People saw her now for what she was. Not a misunderstood career woman stuck in a loveless marriage. Just another manipulator who thought she was too clever to get caught. And through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't need to. The book spoke for me. Every line was a truth she'd written. Every chapter was a page she'd handed me. She had built the story, and I had only given it to the world. In private, she tried to regain control. A long email arrived one night, riddled with phrases like misunderstanding, and too far, and maybe we could talk. She even tried to twist it back into a compliment, said she always knew I had talent, said the book proved it. Said maybe we could still figure things out. Like somehow, after everything, I'd be grateful for her betrayal because it made me successful. I never replied. By then, the Mistress Ledger had landed on the New York Times extended list. A film rights inquiry was sitting in my inbox. I was already halfway through the next novel. Rachel had once said in her journal that she felt more alive lying to me than telling the truth. I wondered if she still felt that way, now that everyone knew exactly who she was. The line outside the bookstore curled halfway down the block. Most of them clutched copies of the Mistress Ledger, some dog-eared and well-loved, others brand new and fresh with that sharp, factory-pressed scent. A few wore that look, half excited, half unsure, the kind of expression people wear when they're about to meet someone who knows their favorite secret. I sat behind a table covered in a black cloth, the book stacked in neat pyramids at my side. A silver pen in my hand. A bottle of water I hadn't touched. And on my left hand, the wedding band I hadn't yet taken off, not because I still believed in what it symbolized, but because removing it would feel like letting her erase something. Like she hadn't already erased enough. It didn't mean love anymore. It meant something else entirely. A wound that had calloused over. A weight I had learned to carry. A scar I chose not to hide. People shuffled up one by one, offering their copies, sometimes a note, sometimes a question. They asked about the protagonist, about the emotional tone, about the eerie realism behind the betrayal. A few whispered their own stories, wives who left, husbands who lied, families unraveled by secrets not so different from mine. They said the book felt like truth wrapped in fiction. They said it made them feel seen. When they asked how I created such a convincing character, this cold, calculating wife who dismantled her marriage with surgical precision, I just smiled and gave the same answer every time: truth is stranger than fiction. Because it is. It always is. Some recognized it. Not the full truth, not the specifics, but the shape of it. They saw it in the way the prose held its breath during the ugliest moments. They saw it in the silence between the lines, in the weight of each decision the narrator made. They understood. Not all of them could articulate why, but they knew. Rachel never came to the signing. She wouldn't have dared. By then, she had moved out of town, slipping away in the middle of a long weekend, like someone escaping a place haunted by their own reflection. She didn't post about it, didn't leave forwarding information. Just packed up her life and disappeared into whatever shadow she could find, hoping the whispers wouldn't follow. But they did. Even in her absence, the character remained. She was frozen in print now, immortalized in bookstores, online forums, podcast debates. A fiction stitched together from her truths. The more she tried to vanish, the more the image lingered. Brandon, as far as I knew, had relocated too. Rumor had it he tried rebranding himself as a consultant. Whatever that meant. His name faded quickly, he was never the star of the story anyway. Just a footnote in a larger betrayal. A shadow to the hurricane. Back at the signing, a woman approached with tears in her eyes. She said something about the book giving her closure. Something about recognizing herself in the pages. I listened. Nodded. Signed her copy with the same practiced swirl. After she walked away, I sat in the stillness for a moment, the weight of everything settling quietly in my chest. The revenge had never been about humiliation. It wasn't even about justice, not really. It was about reclaiming my voice in a story that had once excluded me. About turning the silence I had lived in for so long into something permanent. Loud. Unignorable. They say healing isn't linear. They're right. There were still days I caught myself thinking of her in past tense, then flinching at how present the memory remained. Still nights where I replayed the early years, before the cracks formed, wondering if I had missed the signs or if the signs had simply disguised themselves as love. But mostly, I felt calm. Not peace, exactly, but a quiet understanding that I had survived something I wasn't meant to. That night, after the bookstore closed and the last copy had been signed, I walked home. The streets were still wet from a light rain. Everything smelled like pavement and leaves. Inside, the house was warm, simple, quiet. I placed my pen on the desk, next to a fresh manuscript draft. The next story. Not about her this time. Not directly, anyway. But she would always be there. In the shadows of every character I wrote. In the lessons I could never unlearn. I stood for a moment in the dark, letting the quiet settle around me. She had wanted to rewrite our marriage behind my back. So I rewrote her in ink. And the whole country's reading her now.